BARK Radio.
What's good, everybody? It's Robo from Allbark back with another video, and today we're getting my college football Week 8 picks. We are finally at the best time of the year, which is when college football starts on Tuesday and lasts all week long. Week 8 starts tonight in the Conference USA and continues all week long with some big matchups. Before we get into those games, let's go ahead and recap the Week 7 results. Week 7 was another pretty average one for the picks. I had a decent win-loss record, but against the spread was again about 500, which makes back-to-back weeks now. Still a very strong ATS record on the season, but I'm obviously hoping to keep building that margin upwards rather than staying put. This week starts on Tuesday night as we've got football every day of the week now, so let's try and get back to winning and dive into Week 8, starting with those Tuesday matchups. Tuesday starts at 7 Eastern with New Mexico State heading all the way out to Lynchburg, Virginia to take on Liberty. Liberty is the clear better team in this matchup despite a poor record. They really showed up last week on the road defensively, shutting down UTEP completely, and Ethan Vasco looked fairly healthy at quarterback. Logan Fife is a solid quarterback for New Mexico State, but they just cannot run the football, mainly because of the offensive line play. Liberty has the pieces on the defensive end and has had some big defensive performances this season outside of just last week. A spread around 10 could be iffy with these Tuesday games, but I do not see Liberty losing this game at home. They're starting to get into a rhythm, so they'll give me Liberty by 2 scores, 31-17. Arkansas State at South Alabama could be a great game Tuesday night. I feel like this is a higher scoring game as I really believe in both offenses. Both quarterbacks had big days here and there, and neither defense has done anything noteworthy this season. 7.5 points on a spread might be a bit much to me, as Arkansas State has found ways to beat Texas State a few weeks ago and hang with Iowa State earlier this season. I think it's clear there's a decent team there, but on the road, they just haven't really been the same. However, these teams are similar enough in talent level to me to trust Arkansas State to keep this one within a touchdown, especially with how bad South Alabama has looked defensively. So I'll take the Jags close, 34-30. I think Western Kentucky is a better football team than FIU by a decent margin. I really like the offense with Henry and McIver and Wright. They've performed pretty much all season long, and FIU has really hit a dull spot lately, getting massacred by UConn and Delaware. FIU does have experience, though, especially at quarterback, but Western Kentucky is the top team in Conference USA to me, and FIU's had some serious issues defensively on the road. This should be a very winnable game for Western Kentucky at home, where that offense really thrives, so I'll trust the talent here to cover, 37-20. This next game is one I'm actually really looking forward to. Jacksonville State suffered a huge scare last week against a terrible Sam Houston team, but that should wake them up, and this team can absolutely run the football with a dual threat quarterback and a good running back in Cam Cook. I think that defense bounces back a bit and plays a better game against a very formidable opponent in Delaware this week. This is a complete toss-up to me as Delaware has shown up all season long, but I just like taking the home team in these weeknight spots when I don't necessarily think the talent gap is that large. So I'll ride with Jacksonville State close as a home dog, 30-27. Two of the worst teams in America face off this week in UTEP at Sam Houston Wednesday night. UTEP got absolutely zero offensive production last week at home. Liberty has a good defense for sure, but that quarterback play between Malachi Nelson and Skylar Locklear was some of the worst I have ever seen. Just absolutely zero ability to move the football or get it to their playmakers' hands. Sam Houston is a disastrous team who still has not found a win after losing last week on a walk-off field goal. This might be their only opportunity for a win this season though, so I'll take them at home as a 3-point dog. But this is just not a surefire pick by any means. Both of these teams suck, honestly. I'll go 24-21 final. Tulsa was a good story early on this season, competing in a lot of games and even knocking off Oklahoma State on the road. But lately they've sputtered a bit, getting blown out by Memphis after dropping the Tulane game. And this week is tough again as East Carolina is genuinely a good Group of 5 football team. They hung around with Tulane a bit last week, nearly pulling off the upset thanks to a bunch of Tulane mistakes. But even though I think they were outmatched there, they clearly can compete. This game is back at home for ECU as well, but 17.5 points against a coaching staff I really have begun to trust is a bit tough for me to get to. They kind of hung around a bit themselves against Tulane, so why not here with Tulsa? I'll take ECU to win this one though, 33-20. Friday kicks off with Louisville heading down to Miami. The Canes had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. They're back at home in a night game, and they've got real weapons around Carson Beck, who has been killing it this season. The defense has been great, led by the nation's best pass rusher and Ruben Bain as well, so I really love this Miami team. Even though I know Louisville has some talent on their offense that could score some points here if they play their best, I really think Miami has the ability to roll in this one, which is an overwhelming amount of talent that's clear as day chasing a national title this season. Give me Miami by over 2 scores, 34-17. Minnesota has been struggling this season more than I would have expected. They've had some injury issues this season though, so I definitely give them a bit of a pass, but they definitely are in for a very tough test this week hosting Nebraska. Nebraska's been underwhelming a bit lately, struggling to put away Michigan State for a while, and then having to come from behind to beat Maryland on the road last week. But wins are wins, and this team is getting it done despite some lackluster performances from Dylan Raiola. I definitely think Minnesota's defense could force another turnover or two from him in this game and keep it close, but I do trust Nebraska's talent level and coaching staff to pull off another close road win this week, 27-24. This game between San Jose State and Utah State could be fun to watch from an offensive standpoint, but a pretty ugly one to pick. Both these teams have had some big letdown performances recently and are really up and down, but one thing I know and trust is both offenses can score some points. Bryson Barnes has played well this year up until last week at Hawaii, and the same goes for Walker Egget besides the first couple weeks, although I still don't think he's a quality quarterback. His weapons are just very talented. I don't like either defense to get many stops in this game, but I think Utah State coming back home this week should be a solid boost, and they can rebound and get this one done over a bad Spartans defense, 38-31. North Carolina is legitimately unpickable at this point. They are easily one of the worst, if not the absolute worst, Power 5 team in the country. This Cal team has been super up and down, mainly due to youth and a poor offensive line, but I am still a big fan of the difference-making ability of Jaron Kiave-Sungapolotele, and I really think Cal's offense is a huge day against North Carolina this weekend. 10.5 is really not much to lay against a team this bad in my opinion, so as long as Cal shows up, I feel comfortable picking them to win and cover this week, 34-21. LSU at Vanderbilt is a huge SEC matchup Saturday. Vanderbilt is a very good team. They're strong in the trenches. Pavia extends plays and gets his team down the field and pressures defenses. And they can absolutely limit offenses, as we saw them do with Alabama for the majority of that game. But LSU's defense is one that I think can completely change this game. They cannot afford another loss, and I'm still waiting for that offense to wake up and get things going to help that defense out. We saw a bit of it last week against South Carolina, but I just think they're the better team in this matchup and love that they're on the underdog in this one. I'll take them on the road this week behind Nuss and that stout defense, 24-20. Georgia Tech is on upset watch this week on the road at Duke. That Duke passing game is special. I really love Darian Mensah and what he's put on film this season. They can score on pretty much anyone, and Georgia Tech is not a stout defense, honestly. It could get beat through the air. But what makes this one tougher is the fact that Georgia Tech just shows up consistently in big games. Haynes King has a knack for taking over when Georgia Tech needs him to, and I definitely don't think he'll lay down in this one. But Duke has had extra prep time for this game, and that offense has been absolutely buzzing lately. I'm going to believe in Mensah and the Blue Devils to pull off the upset this week at home, 34-31. Washington has one loss in the season, and it's to the number one team in the country in Ohio State. Damon Williams continues to break out, putting up over 500 total yards of offense last week against Rutgers, and I really believe in this team. Michigan definitely has found some rhythm with Underwood and his top two receiving threats, but the O-line play is still lackluster, and the play calling is vanilla enough to say they probably don't blow Washington out here. And on top of that, the defense last week looked nothing like themselves. So many different guys rotating in and out of the game, and just bad game planning in general, in my opinion. I think taking Washington to cover on the road is the right move here, but I still believe in Michigan is equally as good a team as Washington and in a pretty desperate spot right now and still has a strong rushing attack. So I'll take the Wolverines to bounce back just enough, 27-24. We've got a rivalry game between UConn and Boston College next, and this one's a complete toss-up, honestly. Boston College has been pretty bad this season and is severely underperforming as an offense. They're coming off back-to-back blowout losses to Pitt and Clemson, which makes this game an absolute must-win to get any good vibes back in that locker room to finish out the year. UConn is a talented Group of 5 team, but not nearly as close to the caliber of teams Boston College has faced in recent weeks. They just obliterated FIU at home, but the previous games before that were a 4-point win over Buffalo, a 6-point win over Ball State, and a loss to Delaware at home. Boston College has looked terrible lately, but I'll trust a get-right spot at home this week for BC, 31-28. Houston hosts Arizona Saturday, and this is a really tough game for them. Arizona's defense looks like it's improving a bit to me. The corners have been playing well, and Houston's offense doesn't really have much I love. Amari Thomas and Tanner Koziel are good weapons, but they just haven't really popped as a team this season to me. And I definitely think their defense is a bit vulnerable despite some decent numbers this season. I still trust Noah Fafita and Arizona's offense a fair amount, and they nearly pulled off the BYU upset last week, losing in overtime. So I'll trust them to use that momentum and go on the road this week and beat a team that's just not nearly up to par with the BYU, 28-24. Baylor at TCU should be a fun one. Both these offenses have some elite firepower, especially at the quarterback position. I am a big fan of Sawyer Robinson, as I've said preseason and in past weeks, but the Baylor defense has just been so rough to watch, and with TCU, Josh Hoover was looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the country early on, and has since hit a bit of a roadblock, struggling in that Colorado game a bit, and then throwing a couple picks on the road at Kansas State. But I think that TCU defense was pretty poor on 3rd and 4th downs last week, which is why Kansas State was able to extend drives and control the pace of that game. I still believe TCU is the better of these two teams slightly, and playing at home is enough of an advantage to me to take them to win this game. I'll go 38-34 Frogs. I really like this Tulane team. They really struggled to finish drives last week, kicking field goal after field goal and making mental mistake after mental mistake, and still found a way to cover the spread against ECU, although by just half a point. But they absolutely should have won that game by more, and if you watch these videos weekly, you know how I feel about this Army team. I believe in the defense a decent amount, but I just do not see it with this offense. Every once in a while they put up a solid day, but against this Tulane front who has shut down much better teams this season, I just do not see them getting much at home, and this Army team actually got blown out by ECU earlier this season, who Tulane just beat. So I'll take Tulane by double digits this week, 31-14. This Bowling Green Central game is a weird one. Bowling Green's offense really is not special. They struggled to run against Toledo and did not care and kept doing it, and they still managed to win that game at home. Now, how do they respond the following week after a rivalry win? Central Michigan is just not a good team. And one thing about the MAC is it is completely unpredictable most of the time. But these teams just play better at home more often than not in conference. And I think Bowling Green has been pretty trustworthy this season in their own building. So I'll take them at home this week again, 27-21. Miami, Ohio is a better team than Eastern Michigan, but I really don't think it's by a very sizable margin. Daquan Finn is a playmaker and creates his own offense, but EMU has proven the past few weeks that they aren't quite as bad as we thought they were after the Long Island loss. And Miami has been pretty good lately, but has played 3 consecutive cupcake games in Lindenwood, Northern Illinois, and Akron. Back home this week, I definitely expect them to win yet again, but I really can't trust any team in the MAC to win by double digits, except in certain scenarios. And I think Easterns look decent enough to assume they at least compete a bit in this game. I'll go 30-20. John Mateer and Oklahoma are on the road at South Carolina Saturday. Oklahoma is definitely the better team to me. That defense is incredible, and they're coming off a really tough loss at Texas last week where it was pretty clear Mateer was not himself. And that's exactly what worries me in this spot on the road. South Carolina is a tough place to play, and if Mateer is still not fully healthy, I just don't love backing this offense going on the road and scoring enough to beat Lenora Sellers at home by more than a possession. I am leaning towards Oklahoma getting the win, but 5.5 is enough value with South Carolina for me to think it's worth a look when I see this game coming down to the final minutes, unless Mateer just plays way better with his hand injury. So I'll go with Oklahoma, but close depending on Mateer's health, 23-20. West Virginia is a team that's really hard to read because of how much is changing week to week. We saw them genuinely compete with BYU offensively in that second half, not letting them run away with that game and covering in the final minutes. And since that game, they've had a bye, which is a great time to get a young quarterback getting more reps. UCF on the road is really not a tough game that they have no shot in, but West Virginia is just not going to win many games the rest of the way. Cam Fancher is healthy now for UCF, which gave him a slight boost last week, but they found basically no success against Cincinnati still. So looking at this spread, I like West Virginia to compete and keep it close, but I will take UCF to win with the home field advantage, 30-24. Toledo is still one of the best teams in the MAC, and like I said last week, they do not always play like it. They lost at Bowling Green last week, and they just did not look great throughout that game at all. But coming back home against a very inferior opponent could absolutely kick things into high gear, and they dominate again. I just know how good I saw Kent State play a week ago against UMass, and believe the momentum could carry over a little bit into this game. If they can score once or twice, that spread is definitely coverable, but Toledo is just a completely different team than UMass, and it really makes it tough to love. I just don't know what to think of this Toledo team based on how the season's gone. So I'll take Kent State to cover, but Toledo wins 35-14. UMass is a complete disaster. We just saw them lose to Kent State in embarrassing fashion. And Buffalo is simply a better team than Kent State. They were actually involved in a bit of a shootout with Kent State earlier this year, but still came away with a win despite a very poor performance compared to the rest of their season to this point. So I still feel comfortable saying that Buffalo is the better team, and going on the road at UMass is just not something that worries me one bit. I really do not think this game should be close at all unless Buffalo just plays a nightmare of a game again. So give me Buffalo big, 35-13. Northwestern's coming off a massive road win at Penn State, which resulted in the firing of James Franklin, and honestly, I really do not know what to expect from Northwestern this week. I'm sure nobody really expected that result in that building, and they've got to be riding super high right now. So this could definitely be a letdown spot, even though they're coming back home and facing a weak Purdue team. But from what we've seen on Purdue this season, they are decent in the trenches, and they can score points offensively. They just hung with Minnesota on the road, who I still grade much higher of a team than Northwestern. So I don't see why they can't do it again in this spot. Maybe even pull off the road upset, but I'll take Northwestern at home by a field goal, 24-21. UL Monroe's loss to Coastal Carolina was not shocking, honestly, but I didn't pick it, and I had a lot of faith in that defense and coaching staff to help carry that win. But the quarterback play was just so bad, and that offense found zero success against a bad Coastal team. The game really wasn't ever in control for them, and I just do not think you can trust that offense to compete against good teams. And that's exactly what Troy has established themselves as. They just beat a solid Texas State team on the road last week. I think this ULM offense is by far the easiest to stop of any of their recent opponents, and I trust Troy's offense to show up on the road again as they just did last week. So give me Troy here, 30-20. Ohio State's an absolute wagon right now. I don't see anyone getting in their way until maybe their road trip to Ann Arbor at the end of the year. And honestly, I don't expect any games to be remotely close until then either, especially not this week at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is just an objectively bad football team. They can't move the ball on offense whatsoever. Just got shut out by Iowa at home, and the defense fell apart last week against that Iowa offense after allowing Bryce Underwood in Michigan to throw all over them despite a ton of drops and penalties. The Buckeye defense is probably shutting Wisconsin out for the majority of this game, and Sayin and the offense continue to improve week to week. So give me Ohio State on the road big, 41-7. Indiana is back home taking on Michigan State this week, who continues to struggle. And I've got to give Indiana the respect they deserve after pulling off one of the biggest wins in their program's history last week on the road at Oregon. I said I expected them to compete, but just thought they would continue to drop games like that against elite competition. But it obviously appears that Iowa game was a fluke, and Indiana is the elite team in the Big Ten this year, along with the Buckeyes. Fernando Mendoza is a star, and Elijah Surratt is such a weapon, not to mention the defense. I was sky high on D'Angelo Pons when he was at JMU and have praised him for 2 years now, but it's still not enough. I think this Indiana team rolls over a brutally struggling Sparty team this week, 45-13. Texas A&M is at Arkansas this week, and the Razorbacks can score, but A&M's defense has been very good this season, and I really trust the talent throughout it. Arkansas hung with Tennessee on the road last week, which has to instill some confidence, but A&M is a clear-cut top 5 team in the country throughout the first half of the year, and I think they're just a different beast than that Tennessee team was, especially defensively. I don't necessarily see this game playing out how the Notre Dame game did for Arkansas, but I do trust A&M's offense enough after last week to consistently score against a very rough Arkansas defense on the road, and probably just outmatch Arkansas later on in the second half to secure the cover, 34-24. Georgia-Auburn was a weird game, honestly, but props to Georgia again for showing up on the road and beating another formidable opponent. It is clear as day they are a playoff-level team, but this week they've got to face another playoff-caliber team in Ole Miss. Ole Miss is coming off a disgusting win over Washington State where they played pretty bad throughout and won by just 3 despite being 30-plus point favorites. It was a look-ahead spot, but that was not close to the result they were looking for. However, I do feel like they're going to show up a much different team this week and give this one every ounce of energy they have. Trinidad Shameless has proven himself against LSU, and I just think that carries over into this game enough to keep it close. And I still do not trust the Georgia offense enough to cover over a touchdown here. I'll go with Georgia winning, though, 27-23. Clemson has been playing much better football the past couple weeks, almost reconstructing their season, finally waking up on offense and looking like the Clemson we expected to see. And while that may be true, it also was just Boston College and North Carolina that they look great against. This week's matchup against SMU is going to be the real test to tell if Clemson is really breaking out or if it's just a result of their opponents. Honestly, I'm not super fond of this SMU team either, but they absolutely can compete with the Clemson team we saw the first several weeks of the season. And I know Kevin Jennings can make plays. So with this spread sitting up around 10, I'll take the SMU to give Clemson a run for their money on the road, but trust Clemson again to get it done with all that talent, 31-24. Wyoming made a miracle comeback last week, taking down San Jose State at home, and it really gave me some belief in Caden Anderson's potential at quarterback. Some of those throws and plays he made were pretty absurd to watch, but it's still clear this Wyoming offense can have its shortcomings here and there, and San Jose State's defense is just not remotely good at all. Luckily for Wyoming this week, neither is Air Force's, but Air Force's offense is clicking at an absurd level with Liam Sarka. It's been one of the most consistent engines in the Mountain West this season and has been putting up gaudy numbers week in and week out. And coming off of a tough road loss at UNLV by just 3, I think they come home and continue scoring more than enough to pick up a win this week, 34-27. Boise State UNLV is a really interesting game this week. We all know the UNLV's offense can score on just about anyone as they've got playmakers and a lot of consistent quarterback play right now. But the defense obviously has been a huge issue, and Boise State has the playmakers to exploit that. And a defense that can make UNLV go through some challenges, especially in Idaho. But regardless of how good I know Boise State's defense can play, we've also seen them get gashed here and there, and UNLV's offense is both balanced and potent. I expect them to show up on the road here knowing the size of this game for their Mountain West hopes. And I think this one goes back and forth enough to where UNLV keeps it within 10 points or so. But I'm going to take Boise at home, 38-30. App State and Coastal are both coming off pretty strong wins this week. Coastal taking down Louisiana Monroe at home and App State dominating Georgia State on the road. Coastal is a tough team to buy for me. They switched up their quarterback situation and the dual threat aspect gave them a lot more life, but I really don't know how well that'll translate on the road against a better team in App State. And defensively, Coastal just should not be able to compete with App State very much. They do not have a passing attack as bleak as ULM's. AJ Swan should be able to air it out in this game, so give me App State by 2 scores, 34-20. Old Dominion James Madison could be one of the best Group of 5 games of the weekend. Both of these teams are coming off of rough performances, but JMU has picked up wins despite the last 2 terrible showings. And Old Dominion's coming off a manhandling loss to Marshall, which I just did not see coming at all. Maybe I have to give Marshall more love than I've been giving them, but ODU's defense has been great all year, and they got absolutely destroyed in that game on the road. James Madison simply has more talent in the trenches and better quarterback play in my opinion in this game, and a far better defense I can count on at home. So I'm going to roll a JMU to continue winning games and avoiding an ODU bounce back. 24-20. Texas State at Marshall looks like a great game after last week, but I just don't know if I buy Marshall yet. Last week could have been a fluke, but this offense is clicking at a very high level right now, and Texas State's coming off a home loss to Troy where they gave up 48 points 2 weeks after a 1-point road loss to Arkansas State, where again the defense did not do their job. This total is well into the 60s for good reason, as both teams have proven to be able to score, but not get many stops. However, I still believe Texas State is the better team between these two, and I'm not going to buy Marshall just yet. I'll take Texas State on the road this week, 37-31. Temple at Charlotte looks like an ugly game to me. Charlotte just sucks. They don't believe in any of their quarterbacks that are healthy and just switched back to Loftus. Honestly, they were lucky to cover against Army last week, as that Army offense is just not capable of doing much most of the time. But even at home, I just have no faith in Charlotte's offense getting much going, and I know their defense can be gashed. Temple's been playing some solid football lately, knocking off UTSA and then nearly pulling off an upset over a great Navy team. I think they're just a far superior team to Charlotte this season, especially with the injury situations as they are. So give me Evan Simon and the Owls on the road to get it done, 34-17. North Texas has been a wagon this year, but they just ran into an absolute buzzsaw in South Florida last week, and sometimes that can really affect momentum getting beat up like that at home. UTSA is coming to town this week super hot, scoring 61 on Rice and actually shutting down that rushing attack, which could make this a pretty good spot for UTSA to maybe flirt with a road upset. But it's just hard to see them keeping pace with an offense as sharp and consistent as North Texas's. Even in that USF game, they were scoring at a very high rate for most of that game, so UTSA is absolutely going to have to match that or show up a lot stronger defensively. Based on last week, I think they have a shot, but give me North Texas at home to get it back going, 38-31. This Akron-Ball State game is a terrible one, a pure coin flip honestly. Both these teams have had super high highs and very low lows this season. Ball State upsetting Ohio and following it up with a 42-0 loss to Western Michigan the very next week. And Akron beating Central Michigan, finding offense, and then laying an egg against Miami, Ohio at home, scoring just 7 points. Just looking at results around the MAC this season, I think the clear theme is playing at home is a pretty sizable advantage this season when the talent disparity isn't absolutely massive. So although Ball State got demolished last week, I got to take them at home against a bad Akron team that really has only shown up twice all year. 23-20. We've got another MAC game next with Northern Illinois at Ohio. Ohio's coming off an absolutely embarrassing loss on the road to Ball State, but has had 2 weeks of prep to put that loss behind them, and Northern Illinois' offense is just absolutely abysmal this season. Ohio does not lose games at home very often, and after seeing Eastern Michigan's garbage defense shut down NIU, I think it's very obvious that Ohio should respond to embarrassment with a much better effort against a team they can both physically outmatch and dominate defensively. So I think Parker Navarro and the Bobcats bounce back this week and take this one, 27-10. Arizona State got blown out last week in Utah, mainly because of starting quarterback Sam Leavitt missing the game with a foot injury, which swayed that spread heavily in Utah's favor. And this week at home against number 7 Texas Tech, his status will again be vital to their chances. If he doesn't play, I think Tech absolutely dominates this game, as they are just a much better team than Utah, as they proved a few weeks ago. And a top 5 team in the country, in my opinion. But if Leavitt is a go, I like Arizona State to compete in this game through the fourth quarter. I'm going to take Texas Tech to win this game regardless, as I just don't see them losing. But Leavitt playing matters a lot, as we saw last week, especially with this one being at home for ASU. But give me Tech 31-21, unless Leavitt misses, and it's by a lot more. Memphis is up to number 22 in the AP poll as they travel to UAB this week. UAB cannot stop anything defensively, and it resulted in the firing of head coach Trent Dilfer. We'll see if that has an effect on the team positively or negatively this season, but against a team like Memphis, I'd have to guess this game gets ugly fast. Memphis can score at will in this defense, and I really don't see them scoring too much in response, as the caliber of player Memphis has on defense is just far better than UAB. We'll see some points out of them for sure, but Memphis might put up 50 here, so I'll rock with the Tigers big, 45-21. Mississippi State is at Florida this week, and honestly, Florida did compete with A&M on the road last week for a while, but once that game slipped, they let it get out of hand and dropped it by 17. To me, that just shows a lot of weakness with having the dog to fight back, which we've seen all year, honestly, and Mississippi State has shown they can compete with anyone, really, and Florida's season has gone so far away from the plan, I just don't think the home field advantage the Swamp creates is really enough to think they'll blow this team out. I think Mississippi State can generate enough offense and enough stops to hang around and keep within a score, so I'll take Florida 27-24. Louisiana's defense looked a lot better last week against James Madison, but they still cannot score and have no quarterback play. And going up against a team who's looked as good as Southern Miss has, both at home and on the road this season, is not a good spot to me, especially after facing a JMU team that can just battle in the trenches for all 4 quarters and weaken you up. Braylon Braxton's a stud, and this Southern Miss team looks like the real deal, honestly. I do not mind laying a short spread of 3.5 on the road when I've seen them show up week in and week out, and I love Charles Huff as a head coach. I'll take Southern Miss in this one, 30-20. Oregon is on the road this week at Rutgers looking to bounce back from the Indiana loss, and quite honestly, I think I fear for Rutgers in this game. Despite the loss, Oregon is still absurdly more talented than Rutgers, and now they can absolutely not afford another loss if they want to make the Big Ten title game. And I would have to expect a guy as intense as Dan Lanning will have these guys more than ready to go to turn things around this week in a big way. Dante Moore is still an incredible quarterback, and I think that defense can put last week into the rearview mirror and get back to dominance against a team we all know they can handle. Give me Oregon big on the road, 38-17. Washington State just nearly pulled off an upset over Ole Miss on the road last week in a clear look-ahead spot as Ole Miss has Georgia this week. But regardless, that was an impressive performance they really needed, and Zevi Eckhoff did not look bad at all. The pass rush actually looked fairly solid as well, and I think despite the loss, hanging around with a top 10 team on the road has to instill some confidence into this team. And while Virginia is another ranked opponent and is clearly a good team as they've beaten Florida State and Louisville, I just don't think they're nearly as good as that Ole Miss team. I'm not saying this is a win for Washington State at all, but 17.5 points is a lot for what we just saw. I'll take them to cover that, but Virginia gets the win, 38-24. I'm not a believer in Texas's offense after the Oklahoma win, but I am and have been a strong believer in that defense. And this week's road matchup with Kentucky should be one they absolutely dominate. Kentucky just has nothing offensively that should be able to compete with Texas. And while the Longhorn offense has struggled themselves, this is not really a game they should be putting up under 20 points in. As long as they don't come out super flat after the rivalry win and let Kentucky punch them early, they can score a couple times early and put this game away quick with another dominant defensive performance. And that's exactly what I'm thinking happens. So give me Texas on the road to win and cover, 31-13. Iowa is a very tough team to beat at home, as we saw a couple weeks ago with Indiana nearly falling there. And obviously the long history of upsets in Kinnick Stadium. And this week they'll host Penn State without James Franklin and Drew Aller after the firing and season-ending injury both suffered. Maybe that ends up a positive for Penn State, coming in with a lot more fire and passion this week. But obviously, it's nearly impossible to side with a team that's now missing their 2 biggest leaders and already had just lost to a bad UCLA team and a bad Northwestern team. Ethan Grunkenmeyer will get the start for Penn State, and we really don't know much about him besides his recruiting status and garbage time play time. So give me Iowa at home under the lights this week, 24-20. Maryland at UCLA is a very tricky game that I personally would stay away from. I have a feeling the whole world's going to be on UCLA in this game, as they've looked very good in back-to-back weeks now, and Maryland has to travel all the way across the country for this game, which typically bodes well for the home team. But from what we've seen out of this Maryland team, they can flat out play. They've had leads against both Washington and Nebraska despite losing both in the final minutes, and they've played well on the road. I still think this UCLA team is due for regression back to what we saw earlier, but Nico is obviously starting to break out, so it is a tough call. But I'm going to roll with Maryland on the road as just a better team to this point, 31-28. Hawaii at Colorado State is another toss-up. So much up and down with both teams. Colorado State's offense looks to finally have some life, but that defense has had issues with good passing teams unless they're just giving them the ball as Fresno did last week. And Hawaii's offense is very good through the air. They have elite receivers for the Mountain West standards and a quarterback that can flat out ball in Micah Alejado. Colorado State had only 334 yards last week despite 49 points. A lot of that coming off of turnovers created by some horrible E.J. Warner throws. 5 sacks, 3 picks, and a fumble in that game for Fresno really threw that game away. And I don't think Hawaii is going to struggle in that same way. So I'll again fade Colorado State this week. Give me Hawaii 34-30. The modern day hate game is here with Georgia State playing at Georgia Southern. Georgia State is a really bad team. This offense just has very little life to it, and they've been getting blown out all season long. And Georgia Southern, on the other hand, definitely has some issues, but this offense can score. They hung with Southern Miss last week and had their chances. The defense has some problems, as we've seen, but this is simply just a better football team than Georgia State, and I don't think it's really that close. Yes, this is a rivalry game, but under a touchdown is well worth taking to me when the gap we've seen between these two. I've got to go with Georgia Southern at home, 38-27. Ty Simpson is my current Heisman pick. He's been exceptional, and I don't see this offense slowing down at all with the incredible receiving threats they have. Bernard, Horton, and Williams has to be the best three in the country, and the offensive line continues to help that offense win them games. Bama's defense has gotten really good despite a couple of guys really struggling in that secondary, but I think they've come clear as day, one of the top teams in America. But Tennessee is still a great team in my eyes and has the vertical receiving threats to really make this game interesting. Joey Aguilar continues to play well, and I do not expect them to lay down and give Alabama whatever they want. I trust this offense to find points too and stay in the game, but Bama's not going to lose this one at home in my opinion. I'll go 31-24. This is one of my favorite matchups of the week, one I really cannot wait to watch. I think we've seen Notre Dame take that step towards being a playoff team again in recent weeks, and that rushing attack is just absolutely elite, and the defense has completely come alive, taking over games, but they're in for a huge challenge this week up against USC. Michigan obviously did not game plan well at all, but USC has a ton of firepower with Mayava at quarterback, and both Lemon and Lane out wide. And we saw a future star budding at running back in King Miller once Wayman Jordan went out. I absolutely think USC can keep the pace in this game, maybe even pull off an upset as they will want this one bad, but I will take Notre Dame at home as that place is going to be rocking, but by just a field goal, 34-31. FAU's offense has looked really good in recent weeks. Caden Veltkamp is clearly getting comfortable as he's got real weapons around him. But South Florida is a very good team, a complete wagon as we saw last week going into North Texas, who has a better offense than FAU, by the way, and absolutely dominating that game after a rough first quarter, turning the ball over a couple times. And not only was that game on the road, but it was against a simply better defense as well. I really don't see how USF doesn't win this game by several scores unless they just play zero defense and let FAU hang around. They should score 40 plus with ease here. I'm going to take South Florida at home to keep rolling, 48-23. Syracuse has a huge quarterback problem. Ricky Collins has looked terrible since coming in for the injured Steve Angeli, and it has really affected the offense's ability to move the football. And Pitt has a defense I really trust to show up on the road. They can take the ball away, and even if they don't, I just don't see many points coming in this game for Syracuse regardless. Pitt's offense has been great all year, especially recently, putting up 48 on Boston College and then going on the road to Florida State and scoring 34 in an upset win. This is just a much easier matchup to me, pretty similar to that Boston College one, honestly, but with a bit more defensive talent. So give me Pitt to roll on the road here, 35-17. Missouri at Auburn should be a phenomenal game this week. Missouri really competed with Alabama, and despite the loss to Georgia, I thought Auburn looked fine. Auburn's a top 5 team in pressure rate and number 1 in defensive success rate against the run. Two things that can absolutely hurt this Missouri offense as they really rely on Ahmad Hardy and Bo Prabula being an engine duo. I still think this Auburn team is talented, and now they're desperate, not only for Hugh Freeze's job status, but just getting back in the win column. They've lost 3 straight games and need to turn it around this week. I have a lot of respect for this Missouri team, but I just don't think they're as good as Georgia was, and won't get that same whistle either. Give me Auburn at home to right the ship, 24-21. This is a potential game of the week between Utah and BYU. Honestly, I kind of wish College Game Day chose this one over Ole Miss Georgia, as these teams both deserve some love, and it's a really hard game to pick. I do think BYU is a bit overrated as they haven't really beaten anyone of significant value. However, they still are a good team, and that Provo environment at night is incredibly tough to try and win at. Utah is a very good team as well, though, and that rushing attack can cause some problems for a lot of teams. This game comes down to BYU's defensive front continuing to play well against the run and forcing Dampier into throwing the football and making mistakes. I expect BYU's offense to find ways to score using that crowd to their advantage, but this is going to be an incredible game with 2 solid defenses. I'm going to trust BYU at home as a dog, but close, 27-24. Oklahoma State has really just become a complete fade this season as they're now starting Sam Jackson at quarterback, who's a former quarterback recruit converted wide receiver. And obviously, after not practicing as a quarterback for that long, it's really hard to trust him to create any offense against good teams. And Cincinnati not only has a very strong offense, but that defense, especially the D-line, can wreak some havoc with pressure and shutting down the run. They really haven't forced turnovers this season, but this is a week that becomes an obvious possibility on top of the run defense dominating. So I just don't see how I can pick Oklahoma State to cover any number, really. I'll take Cincinnati in a blowout, 41-17. Chuba Purdy has been absolutely awful this season, but outside of him, this Nevada team looks even worse, as we saw last week, which is crazy to say considering he's got a 1-to-8 touchdown to interception ratio and an 18 QBR in the season. But against San Diego State, they went with Carter Jones, who scored just 10 points at home, throwing 2 picks and completed half his passes. They have absolutely zero running game against decent defenses and could not stop a cold last week. This team is just entering dangerous territory, as I just don't see them winning another game all year. New Mexico scored on Boise State and has looked very good all year offensively. I just don't think this game is going to be close at all. Give me New Mexico 34-17. Stanford hosts a reeling Florida State team this week as 3-score underdogs, and for good reason, as this Stanford team is just awful. Florida State still has a lot more talent, and despite 3 L's, all 3 were against good teams in Virginia, Miami, and Pitt. But I think it's clear this Florida State team was a fraud. Stanford's been terrible, but they are 2-0 at home, beating San Jose State and Boston College. Both teams not close to FSU's level, but it does say something about when they've actually looked remotely decent playing at home, and have had at least competed in their road games as well this season. I just don't think I can trust this FSU team to dominate games right now, especially not on the road late at night. I'll take Stanford to cover, but FSU should win this one, 35-20. That's it for my Week 8 picks. Let me know your thoughts on any of these games down in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
BARK Radio.